Russian military forces continued their offensive operations along the front, stretching from Kupiansk through Swatove to Kremlin, where on November 6th their significant advance was recorded. Geolocation materials published on the same day show that these troops moved closer to the southwest from the town of Pierre-Sotronive, which is located 24 kilometers east of Kupiansko. One Russian military blogger claimed that Russian units were moving around Stepe Novoslivka, 18 kilometers southeast of Kupiansk. In turn, the Ukrainian General Staff reported unsuccessful Russian attacks near Sinkovka, 8 kilometers to the northeast, Petropavlovka, 7 kilometers to the east, Ivanovka, 20 kilometers southeast of Kupiansk, and Stelmachivka, 15 kilometers northwest of Swatov. Additionally, the General Staff denied any offensive actions by the Russians towards Lyman. In turn, the mentioned Russian blogger claimed about meetings in the forest area of Serebryansky, 10 kilometers southwest of Kremlin. The deputy commander of the Ukrainian 15th Mobile Border Detachment, Steel Border, Ivan Shevtsov, stated on November 5th that about 250 former fighters of the Wagner Group reached the Kupianska-Limana area to coordinate assault operations of regular Russian forces supported by the Burza and Burza groupings, Storm, Z troops, composed mainly of prisoners. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation announced on November 6th that Ukrainian armed forces had made unsuccessful attacks attempts in the areas of Sinkovka, Zahorukhivka, 15 kilometers to the east, and Timkivka, 18 kilometers east of Kupiansk. Russian plenipotentiaries in the Donetsk region and official state media reported that at noon on November 7th, Donetsk, under occupation, was the target of a Ukrainian missile attack. According to information provided by Denis Pushilin, a Russian official assigned to manage the Donetsk region, the city center was hit by 3 rocket salvos fired from the HIMARS system. Pushilin stated that as a result of this attack, 6 people lost their lives and another 11 were injured. He also noted that one of the direct hits hit a building serving the local occupation authorities, and 4 civilian infrastructure facilities were also damaged. Reporters from the RIA Novosti agency, part of Russia's state media, reported that 3 to 4 explosions could be heard in Donetsk. The agency shared a video on social media platforms that purported to show missiles flying over the city and clouds of smoke rising after they hit. Independent Ukrainian media, such as Kiev Independent, did not confirm these events and could not verify the information presented by the Russian side. Donetsk, one of the main urban centers in eastern Ukraine, has been under Russian occupation since Russia began its military operations in 2014. Russian armed forces continued their offensive near Avdiivka on November 6th, making progress according to various reports. A prominent Russian military blogger suggested that Russian troops had breached the railway near Steppe, 7 kilometers northwest of Avdiivka, securing the waste dump area north of that city. Kostiantyn Mashovets, a military observer from Ukraine, noted that units from the Russian 15th Motorized Rifle Brigade, part of the 2nd Combined Army of the Central Military District, carried out a successful attack in the same area, driving Ukrainian forces from a nearby fortress. Mashovets also stressed that the Russians had occupied the areas behind the railway line near the northern part of the coke plants in Avdiivka, although visual confirmation of these claims by the Institute for War Studies, ISW, has not yet been observed. Russian sources also claimed that fighting continued south, east, and north of Avdiivka, where troops were still gaining ground in some places. Certain Russian military bloggers have noted that Russian offensive actions towards Avdiivka have already resulted in operational success, moderating the intensity of Ukrainian artillery fire on Donetsk and surrounding areas. In turn, Yuri Butusov, a Ukrainian military observer, warned that the Russians were preparing for another wave of attacks on Avdiivka, having new reserves. Mashovets also mentioned that weaker units from the 239th were recently deployed to the Avdiivka area. Tank Regiment, which belongs to the 90th Armored Division of the 41st Combined Army of the Central Military District to support offensive operations. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian attempts to attack near Avdiivka and the towns of Stepov, Tonenka, Severna, and Pervomaisk were unsuccessful. However, from the Ukrainian perspective, Ukrainian forces launched counterattacks near Avdiivka, regaining some of their lost positions also on November 6th. A leading Russian military blogger stated reported that between November 3rd and 5, Ukrainian forces launched a counterattack near Krasnohorivka, 6 kilometers northwest of Avdiivka, which forced the Russians to withdraw from the captured section of the railway line. Additionally, an unregulated Russian armed formation known as the Russian Legion, Bars 13, claimed that Ukrainian forces were successfully putting pressure on Russian troops in the steppe area and the Tsarskoye Okhota restaurant south of Avdiivka. Recently, the eastern bank of the Dnieper, which is under Ukrainian control, has gained support in the form of armored vehicles. Russian media focused on the conflict reported on Wednesday that a single BTR-4 armored personnel carrier was delivered across the river aboard a Soviet amphibious vehicle. Photos taken by a drone near the village of Krinky, occupied by Ukrainian naval forces at the end of October, come from the beginning of the week. Ukrainian special forces and reconnaissance forces have been active along the lower Dnieper since May. Operations to transfer Ukrainian infantry to the Russian-occupied shore began around October 15th, and the second landing took place around October 25th, approximately 25 kilometers upstream. Ukrainian soldiers, including Marines, are currently intensively strengthening their positions in an area of approximately 30 to 35 kilometers along the eastern bank of the river. These enclaves are not connected, but Ukrainian forces are strengthening and expanding their presence despite Russian artillery fire and sporadic air attacks. Russian military commentators point out the problems for Russia caused by the transfer of Ukrainian armored vehicles to the Krinky region. Roman Kulikovsky, host of the pro-Russian Starshiety Telegram news channel, reports that Ukrainian Marines have observation posts in Krinky, Kusaseve, Peshchenivka, and in the northern part of Aleshkin Island. Additionally, Ukrainian Marines conduct patrols and organize ambushes on the road connecting the villages of Postepny and Kazakh Lager. The Ukrainian military has relaxed a ban on sharing information about river crossings, only confirming that Marines are among the defenders on the eastern bank. Russian sources identify the Ukrainian units in the area as Marine brigades numbers 35th, 36th, 37th, and 38th, and the 140 separate reconnaissance battalion. Reports indicate that before the BTR-4 reinforcement, Ukrainian strongholds were of limited strength, consisting of platoons or companies of Marines ranging from 25 to 150 men. The strongest Ukrainian positions are in the villages of Postepny and Peshchenivka, although it is unclear exactly how many BTR transporters have crossed the river. The BTR-4 Bucephalus is a Ukrainian 8-wheeled combat vehicle that is standard equipment for the Ukrainian Marines and was first used in combat in 2016, even though it is not designed to fight a tank. Ukrainian forces took offensive actions in the west of the Zaporizhia Oblast, but there was no confirmed information about their progress. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation announced that their troops managed to repel the Ukrainian attack in the Robotyne area. Russian military bloggers reported on positional fighting taking place near Verbove, about 8 kilometers east of Robotyne, suggesting that Ukrainian troops were trying to breach Russian defense lines. Other reports, in turn, talk about unsuccessful attempts at attacks carried out by Ukrainians in the areas of Kopani, Robotyne, Verbove, and Novoprokopivka, as well as about the Ukrainians taking advantage of bad weather conditions to launch attacks near Verbove, which were not successful. Russian reports indicate that on November 6th, their forces made some advances in the Western Zaporizhia Oblast, but there is no independent confirmation of these reports. Bloggers associated with the Kremlin reported that the Ukrainian attack had been repelled in the Robotyne area and that 2 unspecified Ukrainian positions had been taken over after a counterattack. In turn, a military observer from Ukraine, Kostiantyn Mashovets, reported that parts of the 42nd Guards Motorized Rifle Division were forced to carry out a series of unsuccessful attacks south of Robotyne after the units were reorganized and assigned to another brigade. Russian forces conducted limited attacks southwest of Orikhov, also without apparent success. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian attacks had been repelled north of Nestoryanka and near Piatikatka. Pro-Kremlin bloggers reported Russian attacks directed towards Zaporizhia, from Kopani towards Piatikatka, but without specifying which side controlled Kamensky. The Russian authorities are strengthening the recruitment infrastructure in the occupied areas, probably to support the forced mobilization of the local population. Senator Kostiantyn Mashovets from the occupied Kherson Oblast announced on November 4th that he had held a meeting with the region's military commissar about opening new recruitment points in the cities of Henichesk, Novaya Kakhovka, and other unspecified towns in the region. The Ukrainian Resistance Center reported that on November 6th, Russian occupiers had already established new recruitment offices in southern Ukraine, although Mashovets assured that enrollment in the Russian army is voluntary for the inhabitants of the Kherson region. ISW observations indicate that the Russian occupation authorities use coercion against civilians, forcing them to serve. At the same time, recruitment activities for contracts are intensifying in the Moscow region. On November 6th, the opposition website Mobilization News reported that the Russian Ministry of Defense had launched a recruitment campaign based on short-term contracts lasting from November 1st to November 26th. As part of this campaign, people from the Moscow region are to be attracted by a one-time fee of 1 million rubles, equivalent to approximately $10,790. Confidential Russian sources indicate that on November 6th, the recruitment campaign focused on recruitment to a unit described as elite, and the governor of the Moscow region, Andrei Vorobyev, is actively involved in raising funds for this purpose. Governor Sergei Lysak said that on November 7th, Russian armed forces carried out an attack on the Nikopol Oblast in the Dnipropetrovsk region, as a result of which a 31-year-old woman was injured. Lysak said that the attack used artillery and 3 suicide drones that targeted the district, causing extensive damage to citizens' homes and civilian infrastructure. As a result of military operations in the Nikopol area, 27 residential houses, 14 commercial buildings, 2 vehicles, gas furnaces, as well as power lines and solar installations were damaged, as announced by the governor on his Telegram channel. Additionally, according to reports, Russian forces also attacked a community in Marhanek in the Tomak region, where an infrastructure facility was damaged. Nikopol, located on the shores of the largely dry Kakhovsky Reservoir and across from the Russian-occupied nuclear power plants of Enerhodara and Zaporizhia, is frequently exposed to Russian shelling.